Okay. Hi, everybody. Sorry for the delay. Just want to thank everybody for joining us and welcome everybody to our plant-based Eid and Shavuot celebration and cultural exchange. I'm going to give it just one more minute here before we get going. Give anybody a chance to log in who has not been able to yet. And we'll get started in just a second. Okay, I think we should get started. So I want to say hello and welcome. Eid Mubarak, Chag Sameach to everybody who's able to join us today. We hope you are staying safe, staying healthy, and taking care of yourselves and your loved ones during this time. Today, we're very happy to welcome you to our plant-based Eid and Shavuot interfaith discussion and cooking demo. This is a partnership between Mala, the Muslim American Leadership Alliance, and the Jewish Veg. And we're super excited to have a really awesome collection of panelists from both of our communities who are going to join us and share a little bit about the Eid and Shavuot holidays, about the interfaith dimensions of this celebration, and then also focusing on how plant-based diet and lifestyle relate both to the faith dimension and to the specific celebration of both of these occasions and observance. Really quickly, before we start, a little bit about Mala for anybody who is new or if this is your first event with us. Mala, the Muslim American Leadership Alliance, was founded as a inclusive and accessible platform for Muslim Americans to share their stories, their perspectives, discuss identity. And so we were founded as a storytelling and oral history organization. Mala works with a really broad array of partners. We work specifically with StoryCorps, as well as with the Library of Congress to record and archive oral histories from American Muslims and American Muslim communities. We also host a wide variety of arts and cultural programming, specifically with a focus on cultural heritage, cultural exchange, and community dialogue. I think that's all I want to say now. I want to get right into this because we have a lot to get to. And I'd like to start by just having, if I could have each of our panelists just introduce themselves really briefly. Sarah, is it okay if we start with you?
Sure, just had to find the unmute button there. Yes, hello, I'm Sarah Eifler, and I am the Program Director of Jewish Veg. We're a national nonprofit that inspires and assists Jews to adopt plant-based diets as an expression of Jewish values.
Thank you, Sarah. Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy Rahman, and I am the founder of a digital publication called The Chic. And we talk about diversity and sustainability. And today I'll be talking to you a little bit about Eid.
Thank you, Nancy. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Spiro, and I am the president and a co-founder of the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society of Washington. And I bring Jews, Muslims, and allies together for all sorts of dialogues, including dialogues on very controversial topics. Happy to be here today.
Thank you, Dan. Happy to have you. Zainab.
Hi, everybody. My name is Zainab Khan. I'm the executive director of Mala. I'm also one of the co-founders, and I think Andrew had kind of explained a little about what we do. Our focus is on celebrating Muslim American heritage, and we partner with a vast array of partners on issues that affect us, celebrating our cultural heritage, sharing our stories, and really showcasing bridge building through dialogue and connection. So thanks, Andrew, for organizing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for being with us. And finally, Raquela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Raquela. I'm happy to be with you guys. I am an Israeli American. I work in PR, but I also do plant-based health coaching, and I blog online about nutrition and the benefits of a plant-based diet.
Awesome. And I should also mention that our final panelist, Marjan, who is the owner of Marjan's Kitchen in the Chicago area, will be joining us shortly. There's a little bit of a mix-up regarding time zone, which tends to happen quite a bit in this digital virtual weirdness that we're all taking part in. So we will see Marjan soon. But I'd like to get right into this, and I do want to just remind our audience before we start. In the toolbar on Zoom, you'll see a Q&A function. If you have any questions as we move along for our panelists or about any of the content, feel free to drop a question in there. We'll try to get to as many as we can, and we'll have a sort of special time allotted at the end to address your questions. But just to get started, Sarah, I'm hoping you can share first if there's a little bit you'd like to share about Jewish Veg with us, and then share a little bit about the Shavuot holiday, sort of why do we celebrate this holiday, what's the cultural significance, and a little bit about some of the common traditions.
Absolutely. Okay, so as I said, I am Sarah Eifler. I'm the program director of Jewish Veg. And Jewish Veg is the Jewish voice of the plant-based movement, which is the fastest growing social movement in the world. And we do a lot of programming around celebrating our holidays and traditions, plant-based, why that's so important in the Jewish community and in a Jewish context, and how we can further that conversation within the Jewish community. And I want to talk a little bit about Shavuot, which is the holiday that we're celebrating this week, and the origins of the holiday, how it's evolved, and how we can evolve it further. So Shavuot, the term Shavuot means weeks, and it refers to a period of counting grains that began at the end of Passover. Shavuot was originally a harvest festival. It's a celebration of the harvest of wheat, so it's tied to the land. It's also another name for the holiday is Yom HaBikurim, which means the day of first fruits, because it's the day traditionally that farmers would bring the first fruits of the season to the temple as an offering. Now, Shavuot also is a celebration of the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And one of the ways that we celebrate a traditional celebration is to stay up all night studying the Torah and to really celebrate this foundational Jewish text that is the pride and the joy of the Jewish people. There's a custom that sprang up around the Middle Ages that I want to address, which is eating dairy on Shavuot. And this is a custom that we really don't have an explanation for. There are about 20 or so, at my last count, different retroactive explanations that you can find as to why we eat dairy on Shavuot. But really, it's just a custom that's stuck. But it is something that most people associate nowadays with Shavuot. And Shavuot, cheesecake, blintzes, cheese. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and about why at Jewish Veg we feel it's so important to celebrate Shavuot plant-based and dairy-free. And that is that there's a really big problem with dairy. Like meat, dairy is mass-produced in factory farms that horrifically abuse animals. In fact, the dairy and meat industries aren't separate industries, they're the same industry. Dairy foods come at a really big expense, and that is the suffering of animals, something that our beloved Torah explicitly forbids. We even have a term for it. It's called Za'ar Ba'alei Chaim, and it means to prevent the suffering of animals. On top of that, dairy foods and factory farms have a really profound and devastating impact on the environment. There's another Jewish term or law called Bal Tashchit, which means to prevent harm to the environment. And what factory farms do is they are one of the leading causes of climate change because they cause more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire transportation sector combined, not to mention deforestation, land usage, water usage, pollution. Then there are issues of global hunger and poverty, worker injustice, which is really severe. All of these issues connect, they all intersect, and they all have their crux in our abuse of animals. And so we're going to have some plant-based recipes for Shavuot today that honor this custom of eating dairy on Shavuot without the harm that it causes to the world around us, and really bring this holiday back to its roots, which is a celebration of the harvest, as well as a celebration of the Torah, which teaches us to treat animals with sensitivity, care, and compassion. We want to celebrate the joy and the inspiration that we find in the Torah, as well as the abundance of the harvest and the natural world around us. And so to get us started with that, I would like to pass it on to Raquela with our first recipe.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Oh, Raquela, do you want to just, I know you've prepared this really great recipe video. Do you want to say a little bit about your recipe and why you chose this recipe before we go ahead with the video?
Sure. So I have a bit of an interesting Jewish heritage and background, and I am a Sephardic Jew. So in the Jewish community, we kind of divide the Jews into like Jews that descend from like Europe and you know, that kind of like this Ashkenazi Jews, and then Jews that descend from either Latin America or the Middle East or Spain, and that's Sephardic Jews. So because of my heritage and growing up in the Middle East in Israel, I chose a recipe that incorporates a lot of those flavors and things that I loved growing up. And I just basically switched out the ingredients that would have been dairy to something plant-based. So in the States, like Sarah said, it's accustomed to eat, you know, a lot of dairy stuff, so eat like cheesecakes or blintzes. But in the Middle East, we might eat a quiche or something like that. So today, the recipe that I'm going to share is a spinach feta quiche. So what I did was I took the essence of the recipe and incorporated plant-based alternatives. So in the Middle East, feta is a big deal. And I actually added za'atar to it, which is a big thing that we love in the Middle East. And of course, pine nuts. So are you going to go ahead and play the video? Because that kind of explains the steps that you know, correct? So a quiche is also something that I used to eat a lot when I was back home. Like it's something you can get in a cafe. And I was vegetarian when from 14 till my 20s, early 20s. So I would eat it. And then when I went vegan, they were going my quiche option when I would go out to a cafe to eat or something. So this is the recipe that I came up with that kind of incorporates all of those flavors, but is plant-based and healthy for you. I can't hear it.
Andrew, I might step in to say that there's no sound from the video and we can't hear the sound.
Sorry, is everybody able to hear the sound? No? It's very strange.
We could hear Raquela very faintly at first, and then all the sound went away entirely.
Okay. That is very strange. Okay. Well, Raquela, do you want to just say a little bit about the preparation of the recipe, just in the interest of time?
Sure. You can find the recipe online. Maybe you guys can link it afterwards. So I know a quiche might sound like a daunting thing, but it's actually really, really simple. And as you can see from the ingredients, the crust has like 4 ingredients and it works perfectly fine. And then for the filling, the spinach part, I use garbanzo beans. which kind of mimic that egg flavor. And then I used yogurt and pine nuts, which would give you that creamy, kind of cheesy flavor. Of course, I also added nutritional yeast, which in the plant-based community is the ultimate cheese flavor. And the whole thing took me about 20 minutes, including time for my little crust ball to set aside it in the fridge and let it rise. So the whole thing took about 20 minutes prep time, and then you cook it for about 30 minutes. And it's delicious and it's healthy. Like I said, really easy to make. And once people can view the video, it's really it's simple. You don't really need any fancy equipment or anything. And most of the ingredients people can find widely in your local grocery store.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We apologize for the technical difficulties here. We will we'll be sending out following the webinar. We'll put all of these recipes together and we'll be sending them out to the audience. So hopefully you'll be able to view the video at home. And thank you, Raquel, for putting together this really lovely dish. I probably should have had a snack before we did this, because now I'm going to be hungry. But I guess that's okay. Awesome. So I'd like to just move right along here and talk a little bit about the Eid holiday. Nancy, I'm wondering if you can just share a few thoughts about sort of your perspective, particularly on, why do we celebrate Eid? What is the sort of cultural significance? Just to give a little bit of context to our audience who may not be familiar.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me to talk about Eid al-Fitr. Just to give you a little background on Eid, we have, as Muslims around the world, we celebrate two different Eids. The first one and the smaller one is Eid al-Fitr, which is the literal meaning for it is the festival of the breaking of the fast. And the second one is Eid al-Adha, which is a larger one, or the longer one, which comes later on in the year. Eid al-Fitr, which we're celebrating right now, which started on Sunday, it's basically a festival that celebrates the end of the holy month of Ramadan. And to give you a little idea of what Ramadan is, it's a year where Muslims around the world fast, devote themselves to prayer, and perform. They spend their time in supplication from God, and also they detox from all sorts of vices that they have. Eid al-Fitr marks the end of that month, and I would say the people, the imams, and the government and whatnot, the Islamic Authority, they what's the word to this? The Eid is dependent on the sighting of the new moon, but also a few other astronomical calculations, and then they announce it, and then we have the Eid. So we start by celebrating it with a prayer in the morning, and this prayer has no call, so we don't have a call for prayer or adhan for this prayer. And it is held out in large fields. So it could be within your community, a large garden or a large space where a lot of your community and Muslims congregate to perform two prayers or two rak'ahs, which are slightly different in the sense that they repeat the takbir, which is the Allahu Akbar. They repeat it a few more times as opposed to the normal takbir, which you would say once during your prayer. And it's also an opportunity for Muslims to greet each other, wish each other, a happy Eid on your way towards for the prayer, towards the prayer, you're supposed to offer charity, give charity in as much or a little as you can. Fasting is forbidden on that day, specifically on the first day of Eid. Some traditions, so it differs from, for different Muslims around the world. I'm from Egypt, and in Egypt, what we do is, after the Eid, we go to the patriarch. In my case, it was my grandfather's house, and all the families, the uncles and aunts and cousins and everyone congregate. All the children, or most of us, are dressed in new clothing and new shoes, which we prepare for this specific occasion a few days in advance. We take a few days, around, let's say, a week to prepare for this, for the Eid, by cleaning and cleansing of the house, preparing the foods and sweets and whatnot. And then we have our breakfast or lunch, or it's kind of like a brunch, really. And we have different foods and different delicacies, specifically sweets. The children get some money called idea, or in some cultures it's called daidi. Different foods are served, like I said. And we just spend the rest of the 3 days visiting other family members, visiting each other, and it's all about really getting together and celebrating the end of the holy month of Ramadan. We also, in Egypt particularly, we also pay a visit to the grave, to pay a visit to our families who have passed, and we go and we perform a prayer around them. And sometimes we go in together as a family, or we can go on our own, depending on what's convenient for each family. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That's super helpful. And any of our audience members too, if you have specific sort of cultural Eid traditions that you observe in your family or your community, please share those in the comments section. We'd love to know sort of how other people are observing this occasion as well. With that, I'd like to I'd like to go to a plant-based Eid recipe. We have Marjan here. Marjan, do you want to just say a few words about why you chose this recipe, and then maybe sort of take us briefly through how you prepare the recipe, and whether there's anything important to keep in mind through that process? Oh, we can't hear you. One second. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
There you are. Beautiful.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm so happy to be part of the webinar today. I'm from Iran. When I heard Nancy, it seems that we share a lot of culture for Eid. Actually, this Eid first is not our New Year, which ours is Nowruz, the first day of spring. But we do something similar, people wear new clothes, they go visit each other, sometimes they pass around gifts like AD, as you mentioned, Nancy, especially to young kids, or they go to graveyards to pray, or they pass around sweets, special desserts like halwa, sholezar. Well, I was thinking what we cook originally in Iran for Eid al-Fitr for the whole country, which is usually different from region to region. But I came up with this recipe, ash reshte, which is the most common dish in Iran. We have like 50 different kinds of ashes in Iran. It look like soup, but it's not watery. Instead, it's very thick and hearty. Reshte actually refers to Persian noodles, which symbolize good fortune and success. Especially, actually, reshte is vegan since we don't use any egg to make reshte. And you can find that in most stores that they sell Middle Eastern and Persian stuff. Well, actually, this dish, we usually, it's, as I say, it's very traditional, and we usually cook it before any new adventure or a special occasion like Nowruz or Eid. So if you want to pick a dish in Iran to bring people together, definitely is ashe reshteh. So sometimes your neighbor can surprise you and knock the door and say, okay, I have a bowl of ashe reshteh to offer you. While I was cooking, I was thinking about your share. So, sometimes they cook this dish in very, very big pot as a nazri. So nazr actually means when someone wishes to, for a dream to come true, they believe by sharing some food with people, actually the dream may come true due to a spiritual energy. So, on the other hand, the word of chef in Persian, which means ashpaz, pazi means to cook. So, the words of ashpaz actually means ash cooker. So, ashpaz is anyone who can make ash, is who could be a real professional chef, who can actually cook other dishes too. Since this dish is very nourishment, so often served as a main course. It is consistent of noodle, beans, chickpea, lentil, herbs, like parsley, cilantro, spinach, chive, garlic, onion, rye, mint, turmeric, salt and pepper, and cash. Cash actually is dairy product. By just eliminating cash, this is absolutely vegan food. And again, you can find cash in Middle Eastern stores, or you can make it at home just by cooking yogurt and let the water evaporate. 2/3 of the water evaporate, whatever left is cash. Well, this is, you know, in order to cook this food is a little bit time consuming, but it's really, really worth it. Well, first of all the beans like chickpea, kidney, and lentil, it's better to soak it overnight and drain the water well before you cook it. This actually prevents your stomach for bloating. So since these beans, you know, you can keep this tip in mind to cook any type of beans. Let it soak overnight and then drain the water and then cook it. This how you can prevent your stomach to not get bloated. Well, when it comes to cooking, first, you're gonna cook all the beans, only kidney beans and chickpea 30 minutes before you add lentil, because those two takes longer to get cooked. And then after lentil, another 15 minutes. After you see all the beans already cooked, is the time to add all the herbs. Well, the trick is when you want to cook, don't cover your pot because it will make the ash a little bit dark and smushy. You don't want really that happen. And when you add the herbs, this is exactly the time you need to add salt because salt actually helps to keep the color of the green. It will give you a very nice color at the end. Then after like maybe 15-20 minutes that you make sure that all the herbs already cooked, you can add noodle, Persian noodle, which is reshteh, along with fried onion, fried garlic, fried mint, salt and pepper to taste, and that's it. When everything's ready, you're gonna serve it in a bowl and usually eat it hot. And for the garnish, you're gonna add, again, fried onion, fried garlic, and mint, and cash for topping. Well, I hope you're gonna make this dish and enjoy it. It's really, really tasty and full of nutrients. So this is my recipe for you guys today.
Thank you so much, Marjan. And again, for the audience, we'll have all of these recipes in their complete form sent out to you after, if you want to try them at home. So thank you very much, Marjan. And I want to turn now for a few minutes to the sort of interfaith dynamic here, right? We're observing a Muslim holiday and a Jewish holiday. So I'd like to start with you, Dan. If you want to say a few words about sort of the interfaith dimension here, what is your perspective? And specifically, I think relating to the diet and lifestyle sort of dynamic of observing these holidays.
Thank you, and good to meet you all again. Well, many people in the world today see Jews and Muslims as natural enemies. They see, for example, statistics about global anti-Semitism and see that Muslim countries have far higher numbers than the rest of the world. Or they point to interviews with Jewish Israelis, some of whom refer to the Palestinians in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip as, quote, the enemy. Well, at the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society of Washington, or JIDS as we are usually known, which has been bringing Jews, Muslims, and allies together for over 11 years, we see Jews and Muslims as family. In fact, we see them as the closest of cousins. Because the more you look at Judaism and Islam, or at the Muslim and Jewish communities in the United States, the more you find common ground that runs deep. Our holy tongues are very similar. We trace our origin to the same part of the world. In fact, we have many of the same prophets. In America, we both have experienced what it means to be a religious minority and to be the target of bigotry. And we have much to teach each other about how to thrive here without losing our souls as a distinct community. We're not only both monotheists, but we're rather strict in our monotheism, right? And we're iconoclastic when it comes to associating God with anything that is limited or finite. Also, our values are far more similar than people realize. Take, for example, the words jihad and Israel. Those words, I don't have to tell you, are flashpoints for people who want to divide us. And yet, they're synonyms. The greater jihad refers to a spiritual struggle, and the name Israel suggests one who struggles or wrestles with God. Not surprisingly, we all originate from a common father, known as Ibrahim or Abraham. And because of that, we value hospitality, we value warmth, we value reverence, and we value peace. Now, Jews and Muslims, to be sure, are both willing to wage war and have done so at times during the course of our histories. But we do so only as a last resort. If there is an alternative to killing, we take it. For we recognize that everything in the world, everything, comes from the same divine source. I emphasize these last points because we're here today to celebrate what, for me, is an outgrowth of my Jewish values, and I'm referring to veganism. I am one of a growing number of Jews who sees veganism as eco-kosher. Many choose it because it's wonderful for the environment, and they particularly have in mind its impact on climate change. But as a vegan of 27 years, I would choose it regardless of that impact, and regardless of whether I thought it was the best diet for my health. Speaking personally, I see veganism as a way to live gently, graciously, and without gratuitous killing. I figure, to be honest, that if I am disgusted by the prospect of having to kill an animal for my own food, why should I pay someone else to do it for me? Finally, I see veganism as a way to avoid treating animals strictly as means to our own ends. In other words, veganism fosters I-thou relationships rather than I-it relationships, which is another way that it is consistent with Jewish values. Now, I understand that veganism is not yet the diet of the majority of Jews or Muslims, and maybe it never will be. After all, according to the laws of both of our faiths, we are permitted to eat certain animals as long as they are killed in a relatively humane fashion. But in our faiths, we have the notion of what is permitted, and by contrast, we have the notion of what is exemplary or ideal. And for me, a vegan diet represents the ideal. It makes me feel more connected, not only to my fellow human beings, but to other animals as well, and to God. It just feels right, and it feels Abrahamic. Thank you all for inviting me to speak today, and thank you for, if not embracing, at least exploring the beauty of a vegan diet.
Thank you so much, Dan. Really powerful words, and thank you for drawing these connections with such care and thought. I want to go over to Zainab, because this discussion of sort of these interfaith relationships and thinking about interfaith relationships as being, focusing on commonalities while respecting differences. Zainab, I know that since you've sort of founded Mala, years ago, that interfaith relationships and programming have always sort of taken a front seat. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why those relationships are so important to you, and also to the organization and the way that the organization builds community.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Andrew, for having me today. And Daniel, I loved your words. I can say that they relate very much to my thought process. And I think that, hopefully that people will come out of this understanding that there's so much more to explore in veganism, in Judaism, in Islam, as well as other cultures across the world. Andrew, to start with your question, the interfaith portion of Mala has been integral because we started as a storytelling platform, and there were so many of our storytellers that began their story of their mixed heritage or coming from different backgrounds, different religions, different cultures. And that's more or less the norm and the majority, especially in America, as we're looking at second, third, fourth generation Muslim Americans, Americans of Muslim heritage. There are people that practice, whether they're ultra-Orthodox to secular, regardless, they still have that Muslim heritage, and that can be combined with other religions, such as having a Hindu background, having Jewish backgrounds. We've had a lot of storytellers talk about their Jewish ancestry as well. And I think that's beautiful, and that's something to celebrate. Similar to what Daniel had said, there's a lot of correlations and overlap of a lot of Judaic and Islamic values. And I definitely wanted to touch upon the value that we cherish as Muslims, is that's in giving. And this is a integral part of Eid as well, because we donate our zakat at the end of Ramadan, zakat fitr, which is calculated per person in a household, and that's an obligatory means of giving to help others in need. And given that we are in COVID-19, a lot of people have been economically affected. A lot of people have been affected because we could not celebrate Eid the way that we wanted to. A lot of people have elderly family members that have been isolated. They're struggling with healthcare. So one of the things that Mala has been able to do is start a zakat fund. And we've been distributing funds to families, to individuals that have been economically affected. We recently did a donation food drive with Refugee One in Chicago, where over 150 meals were donated to refugee families across Chicago for Eid. And this is hopefully, showing that we're all in this together. And this is a way for us to celebrate food, celebrate culture, celebrate heritage, and learn from each other, because that's really the way for us to build bridges, especially when there's so much polarization and rhetoric that divides us. Hence, food, dialogue, culture, arts, this is a way for us to connect as humans. So again, I'm very excited about this project, about this event, and I really hope that we can continue doing this on a monthly basis, because I think it's so important to start that dialogue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zainab, for your perspective. If I can get you to, I'd love for you to share I know you have an Eid recipe prepared. You want to take us through a little bit, sort of how you chose this recipe, and then talk a little bit about the preparation as well.
Absolutely. So I very specifically chose an eggplant stew, because you can Google every country, every nationality has some sort of an eggplant stew, whether it be Italian, whether it be Spanish, whether it be Japanese, Chinese, Venezuelan. You could look up Israeli, eggplant stew. They even have Canadian eggplant stew. So this is why this is such a basic platform that anybody can really, play around with the spices and make it their own. It's a staple dish across the world. So this is a wonderful way for somebody who maybe perhaps is not fully vegan, maybe is exploring options, maybe is trying to look for a way that they can supplement meat and instead add proteins that are plant-based. So I thought that this was a cool recipe that people can really make it their own. And it's very simple. You start with eggplants. Here in the US, we have the large, dark purple ones. Eggplant is a beautiful vegetable because it's so pulpy and it's so meaty that even if you have a Japanese eggplant, which is skinnier, or even European, you can still create the flavors and the textures by the way that you cut the eggplant. Very simple. You just need an onion, garlic. The way that I seasoned this was more of a Persian style, very simple, very basic, because I have a toddler at home, and this is a toddler-approved dish. So we put cumin, turmeric, which is a staple in every Persian cuisine, salt, tomatoes. If you are able to get fresh tomatoes, that's great. If not, you can definitely use a canned tomato. That's totally fine. And of course, we always use a little bit of pinch of saffron in everything that we do. So again, this is just a wonderful way. You put the items together. You can serve it over rice. You can serve it over couscous. You can serve it, if you like a little bit of crunch, you could even throw some toasted kale chips on the top, which makes it really nice. Just a couple words. For stews, I usually always recommend to chop your vegetables in a uniform fashion, so that way you get the perfect bite in each spoonful. If you're eating it with rice, if you're eating it by itself, if you're crumbling tortilla chips on top of it, that's totally fine. That's how my son likes to eat this dish. It's just, you get that nice flavorful balance of tomatoes, of eggplant, and a little bit of that garlic all in one spoon. So, this is something that I actually feel like I want to explore different ways. I would like to cook more of a Japanese style eggplant dish. I know that there is the Mexican version of an eggplant stew requires a lot of chili and flavors, and I'm actually unfamiliar with a lot of those spices, so that's actually on my bucket list to make. And it's just really a wonderful way for people to know that you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to spend a lot of time, and you can get really, really healthy, flavorful meals just based off of plant-based. Now, we started going more plant-based after the COVID-19 pandemic. My husband's a physician, and obviously, he was actually vegetarian when we had met, and then he would dabble here and there and have some fish, not meat. But now we've really gone all out vegetarian, and the reason being so is because of the health benefits. It's also very, eco-friendly. We're very green here. And it actually motivated me to start planting and create, garden my own vegetables. So this summer I'm super excited because we have cherries, we have a peach tree, we have grapes, we have blackberries, and pine berries, and blue bananas. So I'm super excited. Maybe in the next webinar, we can talk about gardening and cooking from our own backyard. But again, this is a very cool, simple recipe that's enjoyable, and you can really make it your own.
Oh, thank you so much, Zainab. And we'll have to speak separately. You'll have to explain to me what a blue banana is. No, this is great. And thank you so much for sharing this. So we have three really just beautiful, tasty looking plant-based recipes for people to take home with them. Again, we'll send these around to everybody as well to make sure we have the complete versions. We have a few minutes here. I want to open it up to questions for our panelists, whether you have questions about cultural traditions, about sort of interfaith dynamics, questions about plant-based, eating, cooking, lifestyle. We'd like to open it up for all of that. So again, if any audience members, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section or in the chat, and we'll certainly get to as many as we can. The first question I want to ask is actually for Nancy and Raquel. And so, this question came up because, we've talked a lot about the benefits of plant-based diet and eating plant-based food, eating a vegan diet. But something else that we hear about a lot is sort of, the diet, but then also living sort of like what we call like a plant-based lifestyle or a vegan lifestyle. And I'm wondering if maybe Raquel, you can go first, and just what's your perspective on that? How would you define that lifestyle? Are we correct in making this distinction? And then Nancy, I know your platform publishes a lot of work on sort of healthy lifestyle choices and plant-based lifestyle. And so I'm hoping you can weigh in afterwards as well. But Raquel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So personally, I've been plant-based about 10 years now. And I can tell you, I think looking at it, you have to think about how we think about food in general. I think food has become something that people use to do many things. If you want to celebrate, you just graduated, you just got a new job, I don't know, had a baby, something, food. And then they also use it when they're depressed. If people are down, there's like emotional eating, and there's, things like that. So I think you need to re-examine how you look at food. Food is nourishment. But what does that mean, nourishment? It's not just nourishment for your body, it's also nourishment for your soul. And I feel a plant-based lifestyle and being plant-based nourishes you not only, nourishes not only your body, but you as a human being. And as a faith-based person, it's basically a no-brainer, because daily as faith-based people, faith-based human beings on this planet, we practice values of like compassion and kindness and thoughtfulness and thinking deeper about our choices. And as faith-based people, that's what we do in general. We think about our choices more. We put more thought into, what we do, how we treat people, into having compassion for those that are less, fortunate in charity, and then for those that are voiceless, with refugees and a lot of issues that face our communities. So I think living a plant-based diet nourishes your body. Obviously, there's a lot of studies and so much research about how a plant-based diet affects chronic diseases. Everyone's looking for a cure for so many of these chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease, and the cure is on your plate. So not only do these eating a plant-based diet, not only is it preventable for these diseases, it's also reversible, and that's really defining. I mean, it's not too late to start a plant-based diet and live your best life health-wise. But in thinking about nourishment, I think it also nourishes our soul, because as faith-based people, when we're making these choices on a daily basis, you can't make these choices towards like charity and your fellow man and your cousins or the fellow faith-based communities and not make these choices on your plate. So in order to live as a human being and a faith-based human on this planet, it's kind of a no-brainer. You have to make these choices on your plate as well, to honor yourself, to honor your body, and to honor, you know, sentient beings and our planet and our world. So that's kind of how I see like a plant-based lifestyle. It touches every part of your life. So it's not a lifestyle, like a choice. It just becomes your life over time.
That's lovely. Thank you, Raquel, for your perspective on that. Nancy, what are your thoughts? You know, this connection between sort of diet and lifestyle, and faith, and, you know, sort of what we eat, how that affects who we are and what we do and how we think. What's your perspective on that?
Sure. I mean, for Muslims, I'll just start by saying that as Arabs or as Middle Eastern people, we have a ton of vegetable-based, or I would say more so vegetarian recipes that we incorporate into our culture. And you know, it's really interesting that we talk about this, because in terms of Eid, our second Eid, one of the highlights of the Eid is to sacrifice an animal. It's part of the Eid al-Adha, which is literally the Eid of, means the Eid of sacrifice. And meat is a part of our culture and diet for you know, for the last several years since Islam has been around. Recently, though, with the whole vegan and vegetarian movement, Muslims around the world have been inspired by the movement for different reasons, whether it's, you know, cruelty against animals or environmental reasons. I personally, we don't eat, we're not vegan. I'll say that, but we embrace a vegetarian lifestyle for both the health benefits and also just the flavor. And you know, we just as a Middle Eastern, and, you know, having a Middle Eastern kitchen, we have a ton of vegetables and herbs, and like Zainab showed us the use of different herbs to cook the aubergine, or, you know, squash, or whichever vegetable you can think of. Our spices make each vegetable-based recipe really wonderful, fragrant, and delicious. So personally, I don't see the need of incorporating meat into our stews, which is something that is done in the Middle East, and a lot of Muslims around the world have been, you know, adopting that mindset as well. But with some families, it's, you know, if you read on the internet, there are some youth that have been hiding being vegan or vegetarian from their families, because it just, you know, they feel like they're not being part of the extended culture, that their parents don't really understand. Or, you know, if I tell my father, for example, that I can't eat meat, he would think I'm crazy, you know, because culturally, you know, it's strange. But now people are slowly starting to understand the benefits, health benefits, environmental benefits, and slowly starting to embrace the vegan lifestyle. Yeah. I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And thank you for, you know, your perspective too on kind of like the shift that's taking place in like younger generations. I think that's super relevant.
Yeah.
Next,
like we
yeah.
have, I'm sure everyone is aware of hummus, baba ganoush, and tabbouleh. These are, like, you know, the basis of every Middle Eastern table, you know, table spread. And they are all and Jewish as well, I assume, and they're all vegan, you know, chickpeas, olive oil, garlic, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you for that. A little short on time. I want to get a couple more questions in if we can. The next question was for Daniel. And, Dan, I know you do a lot of work on interfaith dialogue, interfaith relationships. And you mentioned that, a lot of the time you try to focus these dialogues on so-called, I think, like tough topics. And I'm wondering, sort of on the flip side of that, it's obviously important for us within interfaith dialogues to approach these sort of tricky subjects, these points of contention. But I'm wondering, what is the importance also of us, as faith communities, to celebrate together? How can we incorporate celebration into interfaith healing and dialogue?
Well, it's vital, and for one thing, it brings people out. And what I have in mind most is an organization, a sister organization to ours, an event that they would sponsor every year for a few years. It was called Spread Hummus, Not Hate. And in this event, you would literally go from place to place, usually universities, but also synagogues and masjids, and also to public squares like Lafayette Park. And people would take a megaphone and we would say things like Jews and Muslims are family, or we're all cousins, or whatever concept. And we would engage people who pass by on the street and talk to them about it, and we would give out free hummus. So I think that celebrating with food is really vital. But one of the things, just so I can be true to form and talk about controversy, people take food very seriously. And so we actually have encountered issues with respect to food. For example, and Nancy was just talking about this, there are some people who have been complaining that our interfaith events are too vegetarian. And the reason why they're vegetarian, of course, is we all can agree on at least these foods, right? But some people say, look, we should have more meat. And then we've also had controversies where we have a Hindu-based group that cares a lot about interfaith. And so they will make lots and lots of, actually it's vegetarian food. I think there may be some dairy in some of the stuff, but a lot of it is vegan. And some people complain, wait a minute, we're eating food prepared by polytheists. We can't do that. And I think it's important that, that statement is made because, of course, most Hindus I know will say, no, we're actually monotheists. So we're able to actually teach people about one another, even through these events that involve food or discussions about food. And just so you know, the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society of Washington is part of a broader interfaith movement, and we embrace learning about all faiths, not just Judaism and Islam, and also not just the Abrahamic faiths.
That's great, thank you. And we'll be sure to include a link to that dialogue as well, so that people can go and sort of check it out. But thank you for that, Dan. That's really helpful. Okay, I know I want to respect people's time. This has been really lovely. I think just to close this out and to sort of be thinking forward, right? Because we're in kind of a strange situation altogether right now. But let's think into the future. I'd love to close out and have each panelist just say in a sentence or two, what's one food tradition that's really important to them that they would like to see passed on to the next generation? And Zainab, I'd love to start with you if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. So Andrew, my father was Afghan, and when he cooked, it was like everybody knew it. It was just so incredible. And now I'm married to my husband's Iranian, and it's very important because I saw that there's so much overlap between the two types of foods and the cultures and the traditions. So I'm very passionate about Persian food, Persian cooking, and kind of, showing the old school way of simple flavors, colors, and spices, and making it so, everybody sits at the table together and has at least dinner or breakfast, together as a family. So those are traditions that are very important for me to carry on in my family.
Thank you, Zainab. That's wonderful. Sarah, can we go to you? What's a food tradition that's important to you that you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in Judaism, we do a lot of baking bread, and this actually ties really well into Shavuot, which again is a celebration originally of the wheat harvest, that you are meant to be baking loaves of bread at this time. And of course, on Shabbat we always make challah, which is a braided bread. And I think it's a really beautiful tradition. It's something that bread really involves a lot of mental energy. It involves really paying attention and being in the moment, and also physicality and kneading, and in braiding the bread. And so in Judaism, I really feel that baking challah, baking bread, is an expression of our faith in a really beautiful way, and something that really invites mindfulness. And obviously, making challah, there's something called water challah, or making it without the egg, which also doesn't contribute to these factory farms that produce such misery. There's so many beautiful ways to make bread vegan, and to make it a real celebration of the tenets of Jewish faith.
Thank you, Sarah. If you wouldn't mind too sharing I would love to see the water challah recipe. That sounds really cool, and it's never
there are a ton
something
of
that I've
recipes
never
up on our
tried.
website. You go to jewishveg.org.
Beautiful. So lovely. So we'll direct folks over there as well. Marjan, just in a couple of words, what's a food tradition that's really important to you that you'd like to pass on?
Well, to me, it's not just only particular food. I love the culture behind that we have so much respect for the food that we put on the table. It's the culture that we want everyone get together, and we're not going to start eating food until everyone really sits on the table. And then the culture that I always teach my kids, just take enough that you're going to finish your plate and you're not going to waste anything. And we are going to have in happy mood and talk about a day and talk about something nice. And it's all about getting together. I mean, it's all about making table ready. My little two boys, they put the plates, they put the cups, they put the even though the culture of that, they're gonna clean up after what they eat, and they're gonna appreciate what they eat. And usually they appreciate the food that's on the table, and they appreciate the person who actually cooked the food. Yeah.
That's wonderful, Marjan. Thank you. So not just what you're eating, but how you're eating it and who you're sharing it with, I think is super important as well.
Very important, exactly.
Yeah. Dan, do you want to chime in? What's a food tradition you'd like to pass down that's important to you?
I guess I would like to make a pitch for legitimate, authentic Israeli falafel. Because when you go to a lot of Mediterranean restaurants or dives, whatever, in America, you get a pita and you got some falafel and a couple of vegetables in there, and it's okay. But if when you go to Israel, and there are certain places, some kosher places in the Washington area that make it authentically, it's only about 1,000 times better. So I would just urge people to seek it out, the real Israeli stuff, not, and I know I've been to Chinese restaurants where I'm eating like the real thing and it tastes worse to me. So maybe this is just me that it tastes better, but I remember growing up Ashkenazic, for Eastern European Jewish background, didn't care so much for the food. Then I went to Israel when I was 20 and I was blown away. And the falafel is a great example.
So Dan, just a point of clarification, because I've been to Israel once. I was probably about 12 years old and ate a lot of falafel while I was there. And commonplace in Israel seems to be falafel and then also French fries in the pita. Is that part of the authentic version in your eyes? It's delicious, but how does that play into your ideal?
I'm only speaking about the falafel, but I will say, as a vegan, I treat myself to French fries.
If I could just throw in there, yes, the French fries and falafel plus everything. You get hakol, everything, and they just stuff it full of all sorts of things. It's amazing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, do they
absolutely. You gotta get everything
on it, because that's what we do in Egypt. We add tahini on the the pocket, you know.
Yep,
Yes,
tahini,
yes.
hummus, pickles, French fries, everything.
Yes.
Raquel, I'd love to go to you next. You look like you had something to say about falafel, but then also if you want to share a food tradition that you'd like to pass down.
Yes, I will just say about the falafel. Nancy, I've been to Egypt. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So yes, you don't have to get the fries. I'm personally probably the only vegan that's not a fan of fries. So you don't have to get the fries. You can get them if you want to. But yes, there's nothing like that. If you live in DC, try the shuk, because then your heart will be warmed. Otherwise, yes, you will suffer unless you go home for a visit. As for food traditions, I think one of the major things you can, parents can do, grandparents can do, or anyone, you know, uncles, aunts, whatever, if you have a clue in the kitchen, have a decent clue in the kitchen, please pass it along. Because I feel like with my 7-year-old, we cook together all the time. And just the process of cooking and appreciating what it takes to make a meal, and appreciating, you know, the flavors, and appreciating where your food comes from. I think that really is what will stay with people. That's what stayed with me from my mom being a good cook. Although she probably wouldn't want me to say this, but she never really liked us in the kitchen because she thought she really got underfoot and tripped her up. But I think that's, as a tradition, just related to food, please teach people to cook. Teach people to nourish themselves, and nourish themselves from a place of knowledge and from a place of appreciation and compassion.
Absolutely, very well said. I think it's so important. I mean, having had the pleasure and also the responsibility of being the only sort of like capable cook in an apartment or in a friend group, or it's a beautiful thing, and it's also just super important to pass along, I think, these traditions of not only what do you eat, but why do you eat it and how is it prepared. So that seems like a big theme here. Nancy, can we close out with you? What's a food tradition that you'd like to pass down that's important to you?
Wow. So I am a huge fan of this plant that is very common in the Middle East, called the molokhia plant, which is the Jew's mallow. And it's used in Israel, it's used in Jordan, Saudi, Yemen, Egypt, like all over the Middle East. And it's sold here in most Middle Eastern stores, frozen or dried. So you cook it as a soup. It's very goopy, and but the way you cook it, it's very garlicky, and there's dried coriander in it, and it's totally vegan. You can add, if you're not vegan, you could add different kinds of stock, whether it's a fish stock or chicken stock or what have you. But it's best made with a stock base, and you know, you mix in the leaves and whatnot. I'll definitely make the recipe online. I'll share it online. But I love that dish. My children love it. They actually know how to cook it because they always come and join me, and they're only like 5 and 3. Yeah, so that's one. And you eat it with rice or pita. And that's one dish that I would love to continue passing down. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, you definitely will have to share the recipe with us, and we can share it with the audience as well, so we can all try it.
Yes.
But thank you for that. And I just want to, thank everybody, all of our panelists, for being here and sharing about yourselves and what goes on in your kitchens, and sharing about how you observe these holidays. It's really a pleasure to be able to host, a cultural exchange like this, and at the end of the day, a celebration. So it's been a pleasure celebrating with you all and learning from you all. If you'd like to get in touch with us, I've put up our contact information for Mala and for Jewish Veg here. We will also be following up with a list of the recipes we've described here, and we'll include contact information for our panelists as well, if you'd like to reach out with questions or connect. But for the time being, I just want to say, again, Eid Mubarak, Chag Sameach. I hope everybody is staying safe. And we'll see you all again real soon, I hope. I mean, we'll have to do this again. So thank you so much, and be well, and everybody have a great week. Stay in touch.